Welcome. I'm Vince Shaheen, Regional Vice President with Corebridge. I'm here at the MIT AgeLab with Dr. Joe Coughlin. We'll be talking about family wealth planning conversations, up, down, and across, and why financial professionals should take a holistic approach to this new initiative.
Thanks, Vince, and welcome to the MIT AgeLab. Joe Coughlin, founder and director of the lab, where we do research on the home, the future of transportation, caregiving, and yes, longevity planning.
So, Dr. Joe, could you tell us what are family planning conversations and why are they so relevant to the financial professional today?
If you think about it, all family conversations are perhaps the most important conversation financial advisors can have. And in many cases, they're not just between a couple and an advisor or a client and advisor. They're what I call up, down, and across. They're up from what adult children might want to have from their parents. They're down from what the parents want to talk about with their children, and often across, not just between a couple, but sometimes even between siblings. Those family dynamics frame what financial advisors are hopefully planning for in the future.
Now, many financial professionals feel that it may not be their role to have these conversations, yet a lot of our clients want to have this conversation as a holistic approach.
You know, it used to be that these were the kind of conversations that a family office would take on, if you will, the family is corporation. But what we're finding is that there's even great complexity in a mass middle market and those who are just mass affluent. So those conversations are not just critical for managing the wealth that families have, but they're also critical for the financial advisor to be more than the money manager, because the money manager has become commoditized. But the money manager that's part of my family, that's the guy or gal I keep.
What are your suggestions to some of the financial professionals who may not be having these conversations?
By no means are these conversations easy. In fact, for many families without the financial advisor, they're not easy. But the financial advisor needs to prompt them to have these conversations. In fact, the role of the advisor in many cases might be that of an agenda setter, to just ask the question, not to push it, but to put it on the table.
And from these conversations, ultimately, what are we trying to understand from the client perspective?
Probably the best thing that you'll understand from a conversation, particularly those that happen in front of the advisor, is the real dynamic. When we talk about the advisor-client relationship, do you ever notice how we talk about the singularity of that word? We talk about the client. The client rarely makes a decision in a vacuum. There may be one that is more vocal in the meeting, but wouldn't you love to be in the car when the couple has a conversation afterwards? So having these conversations reveals a family dynamic. It extends the financial advisor's role to be beyond money, to be part of the family, to be, shall we say, that first call that we all depend on.
And I think you mentioned that the conversations are threefold. Maybe if you could just give us an example. You mentioned up, down, and across. So for the folks, maybe just give an example of each and how that conversation may start.
Sure, those up conversations are things that adult children are thinking about, or unfortunately, sometimes due to a trigger event like the death of or illness of a loved one, we'd love to know well ahead of time. So I'll give an example. So for instance, are you financially secure? What are your desires in terms of how to be cared for should you need it? And by the way, if something happens, where's your paperwork? Do you have things in order, or is that something I'm going to have to sort through? Those conversations that, should we say, are down from adult, for parents down to their adult children. In many cases, they're also looking at things such as, well, how do I wish to be cared for? What are my desires for when I need to move from where my home is to where that might be? Also, what are you going to do with my stuff? How do we dispose of decades of either marriage or a lifetime of housing and the like? Then across, many of those conversations across, shall we say, are assumed and not discussed. Where are we going to live? What are we going to do? And by the way, in a couple, at some point, one of us is likely to be living solo. What's next for me?
How about just for the couples of the across? At what point do do you have that conversation?
So definitely the conversation goes for a lifetime, but I would say most definitely for those who have children, as those children are approaching college and certainly out of the house, that's when it becomes more important, because there's a fundamental change on how the house is being managed, if you will, what our expectations are, what we want to do. And we start looking down the road in terms of what this thing called retirement will be for not just one of us, but for both of us. One of the most important things is that we should think about the fact that there's not one conversation. In fact, an advisor and a family should realize that this is not one and done. Sometimes it's having a small conversation like, where do we want to live in retirement? Many couples assume that they're on the same page, even though they haven't discussed it. That's a little dangerous.
And I think these conversations, too, have to be continued.
I think they should start early on, but you make a great point, Vince. The idea is that they should be continuous, because the desires are dynamic. Health conditions change, relationships change, financial needs and responsibilities change. So starting the conversation early to start to reach a consensus between all members of a family, but realize that have those continuing conversations have to reflect change across the lifespan.
I could understand why a financial professional would say, I don't want to have that unnecessary, awkward conversation. Yep. But again, important in maybe what you've seen in having the folks in the lab and discussing it. How are they viewing it, and are they open, and are they willing to engage in that conversation? Certainly some families are that are more willing to have that conversation. And yes, there are many that are very reticent, which is, who's this stranger talking about my family decisions? And frankly, they don't even want to talk to their own family about those decisions. So they're out there. And that's why I say this is not a one and done conversation. It has to be done in small bites and understand that it's not one and done. I believe that the future of financial planning, as we call it today, will be longevity planning, because it's a whole new frontier that people are trying to navigate. And if financial services doesn't do it, somebody else will. My team is looking at trying to, believe it or not, transform what we call financial planning and retirement planning into what we're calling longevity planning. The idea of being more holistic, that money and that relationship with the advisor and client remains at the center. But around them are all those big and little questions we call life: where we're going to live, how we're going to get around, how do we provide care, how do we manage career transitions. And I also think that in the past, most folks felt 65 was the retirement age. Yep. And as we know today, many folks are maybe going earlier, but starting into second careers and taking on new adventures that perhaps weren't planned maybe in their 50s and 40s. What have you seen in talking to financial professionals and in folks visiting the lab? I think that one of the things that financial advisors and professionals are finding is that traditional life stage model is no longer the dominant life stage model. Younger people are staying younger longer and starting adulthood closer to 40 than age 30. So we're finding things being staggered out. And yes, retirement may be almost like a Newtonian law of physics, be it 60, 65 or whatever, but people are retiring not to quit, but to be more flexible, to do the things they want. In what you've been interviewing a number of the folks, maybe give an example of a conversation that's went very well and how the financial professional was able to benefit and put that relationship above and beyond just performance or product or, what am I going to do with the assets when I'm no longer here? Right. Financial professionals that say, hey, I'm really good at performance. I will not only save you money, but I'll make you money. That's great. But as I like to note, that's like going into a grocery store and being really excited that there's food on the shelf. That's what the advisor was hired for. That's the expectation. The real goal of a financial professional should be to excite and delight, to bring up those things that, shall we say, proactively prepare me for things I hadn't even thought about. Remember, a financial professional has the beauty of retiring hundreds, if not thousands of times. I only get to retire once. So your insight on what I should be thinking about or putting on my agenda, things I haven't even thought about, that's real value. Agreed. And I once talked to an advisor who said, if you actually go through the process yourself and pretend you're retiring, it allows you the opportunity to understand that. For a professional who may be hesitant to have that conversation because they don't like the response
Sure.
that they may hear, right? We may say, I don't know if the two agree on where they're going to live. How do we still softly nudge them to say it is imperative to have these conversations, and avoidance isn't going to make the problem go away?
Right. And by no means do I want a financial professional to jump in the middle of a couple who's having a debate about where they're going to live. But they can actually help prompt it to say, we really need to have this conversation, and to point out why, whether it's tax reasons, access to health care, having something meaningful to do. In other words, the most powerful technology an advisor can use are questions, and using examples and stories from other clients that they've served, saying, well, they thought about this or they experienced that. But not to tell clients what to do, but to help them think through what the possibilities will be.
Looking forward, that's the most important part, is getting them to start to recognize that having this discussion is not the end, but the beginning.
Right.
And it is a path that we're going to continue down and will continue to change as age and retirement maybe continues up. And as we know, retirement now is not 10, 15 years. It could be much longer.
We're actually looking at, for most people, especially with those that are fortunate enough to have an income and education, that what we call retirement today is likely to be 1/3 of your adult life. So think about that period that was from college graduation to midlife crisis. That's about how long retirement's going to be. Think of the changes and the things that were done and the things that needed to be planned for in that time. Now think forward about how much that time will be in retirement. It's more than a few thousand games of golf or pickleball. To be honest with you, COVID was probably the best fire drill for retirement we could ever imagine. Many people said, well, I've got so many things to do around the house. I'm going to spend a lot of time with my significant other. And except for travel, which you couldn't do, everything else was on the table. And you know what we found? You can only paint the spare bedroom so many times. Our significant others did not want to see us that significant amount of time. And frankly, all those hobbies and sports and thought we would enjoy around the house got bored after about a month, let alone after a few years. And so really rethinking retirement is a really needed thing to do for planning. I am crazily optimistic about the future of longevity. Remember, our mission here at the lab is not just to live longer, but to live better. And we see the future of, shall we say, the smart car or the smart home, or frankly, even the workplace, giving us new choices, not just to manage our health, but to provide care to a loved one, maybe even at a distance, whether you live across the town, state, or even out of the country. Vehicles that someday will drive you where you need to be. Homes that are not simply places to live, but are platforms of services that bring the things you may need to you if you can't get out there. And rethinking the workplace to be not just multi-generational, but to be flexible enough to have the very young, the middle-aged, and the older adult worker feel that they all have something to contribute, and companies and the economy get value from it. So yes, between technology, design, and a new story of old age, the future is bright.
And with that, I think we have, one of the largest segments of our population today turning 65.
Yep.
So from an aspect of looking at why this conversation, we see the baby boomers now entering into this point.
Sure.
And to have these holistic conversations up, down, across, is imperative.
And it's novel, too. I mean, our parents, certainly, many of them lived a decent long time, but they had pensions. They did not have the diagnostics, medical interventions, and even the nutrition that the boomers and behind them, Gen X and others will have. So this living longer, better is actually an entirely new frontier for business, new frontier for families, and indeed for individuals. That's why the financial professional today has an entirely new business frontier in front of them, not just to manage financial security, but to make sure that we live longer and better and financially secure.
Right. And it's about retaining the assets, not based upon just performance of the market or, what interest rates are doing, but the ability to holistically talk to a client and say to them over the next 15, 20, 30 years, here's what to expect, here's what to look for, here's what to be careful of. And if you start those plans today, you're feeling, when do you start, right? I think a lot of folks are thinking, well, I don't have to have that conversation. My parents are not aging up, or they're still together, or I have a sibling. And so I think a lot of other folks will look at someone else in the room and say, let's let them have that conversation. I don't think I need to have it.
Vince, you used a word there that really key, that I think is key to work we've done in the past together, but the word conversation. And the real value now of a financial professional is to spur those conversations. If I may, kind of like 3 different, shall we say, job descriptions that the best advisors already know, and those that are up and coming need to learn. Curating what those possible retirements could be. Because most people, when you ask them, they will give you, I'm going to go on vacation, spend time with grandchildren, or I've got so many things to do. Those are short-sighted at best. The next thing is educating what the possibilities might be and how much it's going to cost, things that they have not even considered before. And then ultimately navigating. There will be unexpected things that happen across an older adult's life or an entire lifetime. A financial advisor can pull together the expertise around them to help people navigate effectively what is increasingly becoming nearly 100 years of living. And it's also a great opportunity for the professional to share their story if they want, or share the story of other clients. And that does 2 things. That brings out new thinking from the client and the couple, but also reflects empathy. To show that you have that story, it shows that you're mirroring, if you will, the emotion and the content. That suddenly shows that you're not simply some guy driving an algorithm to make sure that I have enough financial security. You actually care. And that shows that you get me. And that's the number one thing we've done our research, where people expect you to make money, they expect you to save money, and at least give me something I can survive on in retirement. But do you get me was the number one thing they wanted to know. And those stories and reflecting back, that's how you communicate that. And then perhaps the biggest, I'd say, lie in retirement is that retirement's a time to take it easy and it's easy going. Actually, no. There's a time now for managing complexity. How do you provide care to a loved one? Managing medications. You're suddenly getting bills from your health insurer that says, this is not a bill, but down here it says you owe $800. And sadly, one of us in a couple is going to be living solo, living alone. In fact, women tend to marry somebody who's 2 to 3 years older than they are. They tend to live 6 to 8 years longer. Women actually need to prepare for what might amount to be a decade of retirement. They may have planned for retirement as a couple, but they didn't plan it for her living solo. So really, there's 4 different decision retirement periods across that one thing we call retirement.
Maybe just give us a quick story of somebody that you had an interview on that was memorable, where the conversation led to a really positive outcome for the family and the siblings.
So one of the conversations I can remember from one financial advisor was the discussion that she had with a client around a health concern. They were trying to navigate a cancer diagnosis, what it meant financially, where to get treatment, and the like. This particular financial advisor also had a lot of physicians in her practice. She was able to connect this family with different physicians to be able to get another diagnosis, a treatment plan, and the like. But what she will tell you afterwards, not just that family treasured her advice, but they referred her out, and they referred to her as, you're now my first call. So whether it is something as simple as money or as complex as a catastrophic diagnosis, financial professionals should endeavor to be that first call, because that will show that you've got value beyond when the markets are up and certainly when they're down.
Now you have a big facility here, a number of graduate students plus full-time. Yeah. Well, what are a couple of items that you're excited about that perhaps we haven't seen yet?
But one of the things that I'm really excited about is that, for instance, looking at the future of caregiving, how families provide care to loved ones as they age. What are the technologies, the services, and the expenses that are used, if you will, to care for a loved one who may be living with you, across town, or even out of the country? So we're seeing really great strides in that. We're looking at the future of work. I want you to imagine a workplace now that used to be older and younger workers is now a workplace of 3, 4, 5 generations of work. So yeah, living longer and the idea that people are going to be living closer and closer to 100, as we like to say in the trade, demography is destiny. It's changing everything from families to work to finance. I guess the big thing I would like people to think about is that living longer is not about necessarily more years in retirement. It's about new life stages and expectations across the lifespan. Older age, as I said, is 1/3 of your adult life. This is about planning your life, not just financial security alone. Financial security is like electricity. You absolutely need it. You can't do anything without it. But what you do with it is how we measure quality of life, not just security of life. In fact, the work we've done with the team at Corebridge years ago showed that financial professionals that engage in these broader conversations, more holistic conversations, are not only appreciated, but valued by their clients far more than just, financial professionals doing what we think the job is today. I want you to imagine the following. Nearly 85% actually said they had great deal of value and indeed happiness around having conversations that went well beyond money, around lifestyle, mental well-being, how my children were doing, and the like. We also asked in that same study, what kind of words would you like to associate with the ideal financial professional in your life? And there was this kind of nascent growth of words that you would have never thought of in the past, if you will, about financial advice. They were using words like friend, coach, confidant. Not only is longevity changing how we live, longevity is changing the industry. And those who are innovators, those that will not only keep the clients they have, but get new referrals, are those that will reach into longevity, see it as an opportunity to talk about my life, not just my portfolio.
We're not searching for the ultimate product, the ultimate performance. You're just listening and trying to then better understand, where do these folks want to be? How do they want to be there? The what, when, how, where.
And the new expertise is not going to be just the quantitative, not just the products. That's assumed. The new expertise is how to have those conversations and how to take all the stories you've heard from your own life and the lives of the people you've served to make them focused on how it can inform my life as a client.